So in this calculation, Dr. Ramanathan was working in her laboratory and created a new or novel compound that assists lung cells in fighting small cell lung carcinomas, otherwise known as lung cancer. She doesn't know what the empirical formula is for a new compound because she just mixed stuff together. But she was able to determine the mass percent of her compound. So she was able to, using a technique, figure out that it's composed of 3 elements. By mass, it is 47.43% ruthenium, 22.54% carbon, and 30.03% oxygen. So it asks, what is the empirical formula of her compound? Question 1. And it also asks, what is the molecular formula? So we're going to first solve for the empirical formula. So for question 1, we're going to make the 100-gram assumption. So we're going to assume that you have 100 grams. So that means you have 47.43 grams of ruthenium. And then you have 22.54 grams of carbon, and you have 30.03 grams of oxygen. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we're going to convert to moles. We're going to divide by the molar mass, which is 101.07 grams in 1 mole. We're going to divide by 12.01 grams of carbon in 1 mole of carbon. And then we're going to divide by 16 grams in 1 mole of oxygen. So we have 0.4692 moles of ruthenium. We have 1.877 moles of carbon. And then we have 1.877 moles of oxygen. These are not whole numbers. So in this step, we're going to divide by least moles. And that in this case is ruthenium, so it's 0.4692 divided by 0.4692 divided by 0.4692. So this gives you 1 ruthenium, 4 carbons, 4 oxygens. So you might have been tempted to round up to the greatest whole number of 122, but that wouldn't have given you the right mass percents. So in this case, you have ruthenium, carbon 4, oxygen 4. So this is the answer to part 1. So if you remember an earlier video in this series where we determined the difference between the empirical formula and the molecular formula, we're looking for the whole number ratio between those. I'm going to make this a little smaller and move it up. So for part 2, we want to figure out what that whole number is. So we need to take the molecular and divide by the empirical. And that's going to give you a whole number ratio. So we're going to take the 639 grams per mole and divide by the molar mass of the empirical, which is 213.07 grams per mole. And we got this by adding up 101.07 plus 4 times, 12.01 plus 4 times 16. And that gives you 213.07. And this gives you 3. So we want to multiply each of the subscripts by 3. So you end up with ruthenium 3, carbon 12, oxygen 12. If by chance you were to have gotten a random number, somehow made an error in part 1, you can always round up to the greatest whole number. It should be very close. It should definitely be a whole number. If it's not, that likely means that the first part is wrong.